Hello.
Hey, hi everyone. And we are back, and we have Boomer Anderson, founder and podcast host of Decoding Superhuman. Hi, Boomer.
Mick, my man, how are we doing today?
Yeah, good. Okay, let's begin with your lecture.
Excellent. So let me share my screen, guys, and let's hope that we don't break the internet. But let's try this, shall we? All right. So I'm going to share my screen, but today I want to thank Mick and Julia because despite everything that is going on in the world right now, you guys are able to have a conference. So applause to you. And I'm really excited to talk a little bit about one of my favorite topics, which is just ecosystems and measurement. So today I'm going to speak as fast as possible to try and make up a little bit of groundwork on time. But let's just get started by, I don't know, just kind of acknowledging, hopefully doing a little bit of a sound check here, and saying if you have had a really bad haircut over the course of COVID, can you hit that little clap button in the air meet? I would love to just see people raise their hands if they've had a really bad haircut. The reason why I say this is because I myself have had one, and it's in the process of regrowing. So forgive the hair in the image if it doesn't look exactly like the photo. But let's kick things off today by talking about elephants. Yes, I've had a lot of fun in this lifetime traveling the world and going to places like Namibia, but this is really a story about the blind man and the elephant. If you recall the story, which actually derivates from ancient Buddhism, but the blind man and the elephant goes a little bit something like this. King left his kingdom with his, I guess you call them, tribe of elephants. He approached another city where everybody in the city was blind, and everyone in that city decided to come out and feel the elephant. Each one of those blind people felt different aspects of the elephant. They felt the trunk, and one of the people that felt the trunk described it as a snake. The other person felt the leg, and he described it as a tree. And every single person's description was different. Every single person's description was wrong. And the point of this proverb, story, whatever you want to call it, is that without knowing all of the information, it's hard to get the complete picture. And so today, my objective is really to lay some frameworks, because whether or not you're new to this thing called biohacking or health optimization or whatever term you use, or you're a veteran in this space, there is a necessity now, because we are being inundated with innovations and technologies, to develop a framework for evaluating those technologies, those supplements, those nutrition protocols, those diets, so that we have some sort of way to know whether or not these recommendations that we're hearing from all of these influencers out there are useful to us. And so the subtitle for this presentation might as well have been how the hell you can save thousands of dollars and why you shouldn't have done exactly what I did initially going into this space. So this is just a lifelong journey in biohacking and what I've learned over the course of that time. Today, I'm going to lay a framework for you on how to evaluate the different biohacks using a couple of different formats. So if you think about laboratory testing and surveys as those formats, we can use these two modalities, if you will, to assess the various technologies and supplements out there and decide whether or not they're right for us. And so laboratory testing, we're talking here blood, urine, stool, and even saliva testing, has several benefits. It allows us to evaluate our biochemistry and really look underneath the hood. But the drawbacks, of course, are it's freaking expensive. And I should probably just caveat here that occasionally I do curse. So if you have your kids with you, please throw it in the chat and just let me know real quick so I don't let a ancillary F-bomb go. The other thing that we're going to look at today is surveys. And you can use these qualitative surveys to really look at things like monitoring your own habits. And they're low cost and really easy to implement. And as a result, you can bring an awareness to what you're doing day to day and hopefully bring that awareness and allow you to optimize your health for better. The drawback on surveys is a little bit different because we can't really see what's going on underneath the hood. So we need to combine both of these in an ideal scenario to make you really, really effective at your biohacking. And so Mick already had the pleasure of talking a little bit about what I do, but I think it's best on somebody describing who they are and what they do by really how they spend their time. And the majority of my time, something like 90+% of it, is split between really two organizations. The first Mick already mentioned, which is my podcast, Decoding Superhuman. And the second is an organization called Smarter Not Harder Inc. And Smarter Not Harder Inc. is split between two organizations in and of itself. It has a non-for-profit, which is Health Optimization Medicine and Practice. And I'll talk a little bit more about the different functions of health optimization medicine and practice in a bit. But what I like about health optimization medicine and practice is if you think about our current healthcare system, we go to doctors to really fix ourselves when we're broken. We go to doctors to really help us cure certain diseases. We go to doctors when we have been shot and need to have a bullet removed. But who is there when you want to really optimize your health, when you want to perform better? And so health optimization medicine and practice is a framework that was developed by my mentor, Dr. Dr Octokoso, to really provide room for that health manager in your life. And the for-profit arm of that is something called Transcriptions. Transcriptions, you can blame them for really my tongue being blue right now. But what we do is we provide different solutions to help really solve things like pain, sleep, anxiety, etc., before the nutrient and hormone balancing kicks in within health optimization medicine and practice. In the top right-hand corner of this slide, you are going to see a QR code. I am going to go through a number of different surveys, tests, and frameworks that you can use today, really, to start optimizing your health and evaluating your biohacks. I put all of these in a one-page document with links that you can go and access. So if you want to take a picture of that QR code or go to just that link right there, you can grab that whenever it suits you. So health optimization medicine and practice, and it's been about a year since I interviewed my now mentor, Dr. Dr Octokoso, on my podcast. And what that interview was really special. It was scheduled for 45 minutes. And 3 hours later, we had a wide-ranging conversation around the elements of chronobiology, frankly, your biological rhythms. We know of the sleep-wake rhythm, but what other aspects of your biological rhythms there are out there? We had a wide-ranging discussion around things like exposomics, or your environment, epigenetics, evolutionary biology, bioenergetics, gut immune system, psychedelics, and so much more. And after that conversation, I asked Dr. Octokoso, where do I learn from you? And he invited me to be a part of his foundation. And my life has changed quite significantly in the past 365 days. So, in the eternal words of Snoop Dogg in the song Nothing But a G Thing, let's get back to the lecture at hand. And so today, there he is, the Snoop Doggy Dog. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about ecosystems. And I think it's worth giving a definition in terms first. An ecosystem is a collection of biological organisms in an environment. If you think about our world, it is an ecosystem. I know, that's a duh, right, Boomer? But you yourself are an ecosystem. If we go back to the endosymbiotic theory of evolution, which was developed in Russia in the early 1900s, what they found was that our cells, our modern day cells, actually developed by a marriage between, or symbiotic relationship between the mitochondria and ancient bacteria. You have billions, if not trillions, of cells throughout your body, and they all exist in this symbiotic relationship. But that is not the only symbiotic relationship that we have. We have viruses constructing our virome. We have fungi, things like Candida, which get oh so popular these days, that consist of our microbiome. And then we have gut bacteria, mouth bacteria, as well as skin bacteria that consist of our microbiome. And then Dr. Lynn Margulis in the early 1990s addressed this collection of ohms and called it the holobiont. And so the holobiont effectively allows us to look at our health as not just really diet and exercise, but our health as the collection of the health of our organisms. And so when we look at everything in health optimization, medicine, and practice, one of the things I want to focus on today is how we measure that at a cellular level. And that is through the science of metabolomics. And so if you think of genetics as the blueprint for how you could potentially be and what can happen, we then go downstream to things like epigenetics and the environmental effects on what can happen, to transcriptomics, to what appears to be happening, all the way down to the cellular level, which is metabolomics, which is what has and is happening at a cellular level. And in health optimization medicine and practice, what we do is we give our clients a series of tests to test at the metabolome level. These include blood, urine, and stool tests. And what they do is they get delivered to your door. And we do a 3-day stool test to assess the health of your microbiome. We look at amino acids and really assess the health of your Krebs cycle. And that allows us to be very, very precise in our recommendations today. And that really is the best framework that I have seen as of now. But of course, there's room for improvement in the future. Things like artificial intelligence and, of course, quantum physics may allow us to get that much more detail in the future. But if we're looking at a framework for health optimization, knowing exactly what amino acids that you need, exactly what supplements you need, and exactly what nutrients you need can help you save just so much time. And time is our most valuable asset. Now, I like to also stack data. In fact, you may think that I'm actually a data nerd and a very much an experimenter. I have an Apollo Neuro on my wrist right here. I have a Garmin on here, and I have an Oura Ring on this too. And so I like to stack data along with surveys. And so you can look at surveys as a tool in your collection to assess where you are now in your current habit change, your current habits, that is. And so we're looking at things like the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index for assessing, do you have a sleep issue which needs to be addressed through a therapist or through some form of supplementation. And what we actually do with these surveys is we can assess where you are now, we can assess what's going on under the hood, and really make precise recommendations, both in terms of a nutrient and lifestyle modification protocol. And so, Mick and Yulia asked me to speak fast, and I think I've spoken very, very fast so far. But let's take this down to the main point, which is I want, my wish for all of you today is that if you're embarking in this biohacking practice, go out and grab some data and start tracking data on yourself. There are plenty of surveys out there where you can start taking weekly or daily surveys to understand a little bit more about yourself. Or you can go and get lab testing done. Now, the reason why this is so valuable is because if you're going to go out and spend a couple $100 on a nootropic, on a supplement, whatever it is, wouldn't you like to know that that is serving you in a good way? And so this practice of gathering data, both in terms of survey and laboratory testing form, has saved me hundreds of dollars a month, which that begs the question, how much was I spending before? But this practice allows you to be that much more precise. It allows you to achieve goals. And what I want to do next is show you, I'm going to open the kimono a little bit, if you will, and show you a little bit of how I use this in my own personal life. And you can think of me as pretty rigorous when it comes to testing, but I wanted to lay out for you guys how I view my framework for testing and what I do over the course of any given year. And so my testing routines consist of laboratory testing, which I do every 6 months. And there I'm doing the Genova NutriVal, which looks at the health of my Krebs cycle and the cofactors within the Krebs cycle, nutrient deficiencies, as well as any sort of toxicities and heavy metals that I may have. I also look at 3-day stool testing. And so 3-day stool testing, as we'll come to find in a moment, has been a revelation for me when it comes to areas like dysbiosis, but also parasite infections. And I overlay all of that with food sensitivity testing. As a person who ate 5 eggs a day for 5 years, I was a little bit shocked to find that maybe that isn't serving me so well. And then because I like to have benchmarks to know that I'm actually improving, I do run a biological age test every 6 months. Now, surveys, the beauty of surveys, as I mentioned before, is that they're cheap. They're freaking free, right? It's great. And so every month I take what is called the Institute of Functional Medicine's multiple symptom questionnaire. And what that does is it allows me to assess maybe things qualitatively that feel a little bit off. It allows me to benchmark how I'm feeling qualitatively. The PROMIS 10, which is a statistically significant questionnaire to see whether or not I'm improving overall. And then, of course, that Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, because sleep over the past several years has been a huge, huge opportunity for me. And then, how can you forget one of the more valuable tools when it comes to health optimization and biohacking is that daily journal that everybody has. Well, not everybody has, but people have a daily journal and you're writing down how you're feeling, right? And so you can use this information to assess where you are now, to build a longitudinal data set on yourself, and to really use it to evaluate some of these biohacks and things that people recommend. Do these serve me? Are they able to really make my life that much better, or are they perhaps leading my life down an area that I may not necessarily want to go to? And so this is what I do on a yearly basis. And so opening the kimono for you guys a little bit further, over the past 5 to 10 years, I've gathered quite a lot of data on myself. And this means that I have access to metabolomics, genetics, glucose and keto testing if I wanted to on a daily basis, biological age historically going back several years, 3-day HRV, and a number of other different things. But I also use day-to-day monitoring in terms of the Oura Ring. I have a Garmin. Occasionally I've used the Whoop. And I've used time tracking effectively. And I think this is one that often goes overlooked in the biohacking space because you have a number of different people out there recommending different strategies to you. And the question that you should probably first be asking yourself is, hey, do I have the time actually to do this? And by tracking my time, I've been able to figure out, where I've wasted time, social media, and a few other places, but where I also can repurpose that time to more effectively serve my goals. I can then also see through rescue time where I spend time on the internet and where that can actually be allocated more effectively. And coming back to those surveys, I have a data set going back several years now on a lot of these. I've been journaling practically every day for 3 or 4 years, and I'm able to see my progress over time, both in terms of subjective emotion, but also in problem areas for me, like sleep, like stress. And of course, I have the IFM's MSQ, which I actually encountered when I read Dr. Taylor Walls's book a number of years ago. So all of this information we can gather and we can use it to assess various different opportunities for us. This could be opportunities around whether it be supplements, whether it be nutrition, whether or not I should try psychedelics, whether or not I should have an Apollo Neuro, these kind of things. And so when we have a data set, and it doesn't have to be this big, it can actually be quite small to get started, but it allows you to individualize your framework. Kayla said it earlier, and it rings true for everybody here. This idea that something will work for all 7 billion people on this planet is just a complete misnomer. It's just, I've heard year after year diets change, and the recommendation on what diet you should follow goes from vegetarian to high saturated fat to low saturated fat to keto to vegan, whatever it is. And it's exhausting. But by gathering this data on yourself, you're able to take that world that is really meant to be a marketing machine, and you're able to put a filter on that world and understand exactly what it means for you. And so let's take a little bit of a case study here, shall we? And I'm going to use myself because I'm an open book, and though I do this with clients on a day-to-day basis, particularly entrepreneurs, I think it's useful to see how I've done it over the past couple of years. And so let me take you guys back 1.5 years ago to what was a remarkable trip. I spent a month down in Argentina, which is now completely inaccessible to the rest of the world and crazy to think about. You can't get a flight in or out of Argentina. But I spent a month in Argentina, and a part of that was in an area called, well, it was on the Chilean side, the Patagonia. My fiance and I did the W Trek in Patagonia, and aside from tearing my meniscus, it was possibly one of the most fun things that I've ever done. Now, during that particular span of time period in Patagonia, I was drinking out of a lot of wild streams. And all of a sudden, I noticed that I was unable to really go to the bathroom, but also my gut began to look a little bit like a Buddha belly, if you will. And that's funny because I'm I'm a pretty lean guy, but all of a sudden, I developed this little bit of a Buddha belly, and I didn't quite understand what was going on. And this is where the value of the data actually comes into play. And so when I looked at the data set that I had available to me, of course, I went back, I got retested, particularly on the metabolome level, looking at 3-day stool testing, as well as all of those nutrient deficiencies. But I also have these things called genetics available to me. And while genetics is a probability weighted way of approaching different things, it does serve a purpose when you're trying to answer a lot of different questions, like why am I all of a sudden fat when I was basically following a carnivore diet when I'm down in Argentina? I began to also look at some of these surveys. I began to notice discomfort in my gut microbiome area, and it all pointed towards an opportunity for healing around that gut, around that digestion. And so we're loading here. Where are we going? Not sure what's going on here. All right. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about this slide, and then we're going to move on to the next one. So what I ended up doing was this 3-day stool test. And this 3-day stool test told me that I had a parasite called blastocystis. And blastocystis was sitting in my small intestine and wreaking all kinds of havoc on me. In addition to that, I found out that I had essentially an inefficient protein breakdown insufficiency, meaning that the digestive enzymes in my body were not doing a good enough job of breaking down protein. Now, part of that could be the fact that I was basically on a carnivore diet in Argentina, but part of that was due to the fact that I just did not have enough digestive enzymes in my body. Now, we pull on that lens and we start to say, oh, this is very interesting. There's some opportunities for healing around the gut. Now, if you look at opportunities for healing around the gut, we also looked at food sensitivity testing. And it turned out that I had enough food sensitivities come up that it warranted really a question of, do I have leaky gut or not? Yes, I'm admitting that last year I did have leaky gut. And when you start to look at the literature and what it says around healing leaky gut, what is particularly interesting is an amino acid that comes up almost immediately in people's minds, which is glutamine. And so people take glutamine to heal leaky gut. Now, going back to, let's just go back here for a second to this page. I mentioned that I had a genetics test done. And so when I started taking glutamine initially, as was recommended by all the literature out there, I started getting these sleepless nights. And it was very fascinating to me that this sleepless night directly correlated with the amount of glutamine that I was taking. And so what I looked at was my genetics. And again, genetics are probability weighted and not always true, but in this case, it actually proved a point. And so there's a gene that we all have called GAD1. And if you have a particular genetic variation of it, you could end up with an inefficiency to break down glutamate into GABA. Let's just break that down for a second. So glutamate is our body's primary excitatory neurotransmitter. GABA is our body's primary relaxing neurotransmitter. And yes, if you are a biochemist, I am absolutely simplifying this. But over the course of the day, you want glutamate to shift more into GABA. And that goes through an enzyme called glutamic acid decarboxylase, if I have that right. And so glutamic acid decarboxylase, in my case, is inefficient. This means that if I have high glutamate foods or too much glutamine in my system when going to bed, it becomes a situation where I actually wake up in the middle of the night and can't get back to sleep. Nobody really likes waking up at 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm more of a 5 o'clock in the morning person personally. And so by removing the glutamine and looking for other opportunities for gut healing, I was able to bio-individualize my approach. And the only reason why I was able to do that was because I had this data on myself. And by continually collecting that MSQ, I'm able to identify those healing opportunities over the course of the year and course correct my various protocols for myself, or biohacks, if you will, in order to improve and consistently do the Kaizen approach, if you will, and approach really 1% improvements every single day. And so over the course of several months, I was able to adjust my leaky gut protocol and resolve my leaky gut faster using more experimental things like peptides as well as growth hormone in order to get rid of my leaky gut. So let's boil that all down to just a takeaway for everybody. And hopefully I did this in a relatively quick manner. But I encourage all of you to, rather than just taking what everybody says here at face value, and that is very much a, everybody here is very experienced in their various fields, but take their information, look at your own data and tell yourself or ask yourself, what does the data say? What does the data say in terms of my opportunities? Within health optimization, medicine, and practice, we have an elegant framework by which to evaluate a lot of these decisions, but you can also get started by taking some of these simple surveys and evaluating everything for yourself. So that wraps up my presentation. I put all of those surveys that I recommended in here, including some more, in that QR code. And if you want to have a blue tongue like me, which can help with things like verbal fluency, short-term memory, and focus, please head over to Transcriptions, and there's a code for everybody attending this conference. I'll be over at the Q&A afterwards, so if you have any questions on this or any sort of things that I've been saying over the past couple of minutes, I'm happy to answer them then.